It began as nothing more than a portrait, a delicately hand-tinted photograph from 1889, rediscovered in the attic of a London townhouse scheduled for demolition. The image showed a woman in her early 20s, seated gracefully beside a vase of roses. Her skin was pale, her expression distant but alive, the kind of haunting stillness that only Victorian photography could capture. The signature beneath the frame read simply, M. Ainsworth, 1889. When archivists at the London Historical Society attempted to restore the image, something strange emerged. Beneath layers of fading varnish and time, they uncovered earlier prints, and each version, dated decades apart, revealed the same woman. Same posture, same light, same dress. But her face had changed. In the earliest print, she looked young, unlined, serene. In the next, from 1903, her eyes seemed heavier, the corners of her mouth drawn, and in the latest print, catalogued in 1921, long after she should have aged or died, she appeared unmistakably older. Her hair streaked with grey, wrinkles beneath her eyes, yet no record existed of the photo ever being retaken. Experts called it an optical illusion, chemical decay, pigment erosion, a trick of restoration. But those who examined the glass plate said the aging appeared intentional, as if the photograph itself had recorded time. And then came the most chilling discovery. Beneath the frame, written in a faint hand, were the words, "She refused to leave the image." From there, the legend began to grow. Who was the woman? How could a portrait change when its subject no longer did? And what did early Victorian photographers truly believe about the soul? That it could be captured, or that it could remain trapped? If a photograph can age without ever being retaken, then what exactly was it capturing? A face or a living echo? London, 1889. The city pulsed with the rhythm of progress, gas lamps flickering over cobblestone streets, horse-drawn carriages rattling between rows of soot-stained buildings, and every parlour whispering of invention. The age of photography had matured from novelty to necessity. What began as an elite curiosity had become an obsession of the Victorian soul, the pursuit of permanence in a world obsessed with loss. Portraiture, once the domain of painters, had fallen into the hands of chemists and dreamers. Photographers were no longer just craftsmen, they were gatekeepers of memory. Among them was Arthur Selwyn, a quiet man whose studio sat tucked along Fleet Street, between a printmaker's shop and a tobacconist. His sign, modestly carved in walnut, read Selwyn & Co. Portraiture and Preservation. Selwyn's daguerreotypes were renowned for one quality: life. His subjects seemed to breathe on the plate, their eyes moist with reflection, their expressions poised between movement and stillness. It was said that Selwyn captured something deeper than likeness, something living. In the autumn of 1889, a young woman named Eleanor Winslow arrived at his studio. 27 years old, she was the daughter of a wealthy shipping merchant, known in London circles for her beauty and her distance. Few remembered hearing her speak above a whisper. Her presence carried the faint melancholy of someone observing life from the other side of a window. Selwyn recorded only one session with her, an ordinary appointment, lasting less than an hour. The resulting portrait, however, was anything but ordinary. Newspapers later described it as eerily vivid, the kind of image that seemed to hold its gaze on the viewer long after they'd looked away. Selwyn made multiple prints from the same glass negative, as was customary for clients of wealth. Each copy was catalogued and sent to different members of the Winslow family. The negative itself was sealed and stored, untouched, unaltered. But decades later, something strange surfaced. When archivists examined the surviving prints in the early 1900s, they noticed slight, unsettling changes. The woman's eyes had darkened. Her face carried faint signs of age. The background itself seemed dimmer, as though the light had shifted through time, and yet no retake had ever occurred. The mystery drew in historians, chemists, even spiritualists, all seeking to answer one question: had the image itself continued to live? The year was 1927, nearly 4 decades after Arthur Selwyn's death. The world had changed. Telephones hummed in parlours, electric lamps replaced gaslight, and the age of silent film had begun to reshape memory itself. Yet in a quiet wing of the London Historical Society, a forgotten collection of Selwyn's portraits waited for rediscovery. It began as a routine restoration. The Society's photographic department had recently received a small crate marked Selwyn, Fleet Street, 1880-1890. Inside were several glass plates and prints, dusty, delicate, and exquisitely preserved. Among them lay the image that would ignite one of the strangest art mysteries of the 20th century: portrait of Miss Eleanor Winslow. When technicians began reprinting the photograph, they noticed something peculiar. The image was clear, the exposure perfect, but there was a subtle wrongness to it, not in the composition, but in her. The woman's face, once known for its youthful calm, appeared older. The curve of her jaw was softer. The faintest lines had crept beneath her eyes. Her expression, once serene, seemed faintly weary, almost aware. No one paid much attention until a few weeks later, when a comparison was made between Selwyn's original 1889 print and a later family copy produced in 1903. The difference was undeniable. The background, drapery, window light, even the shadows that remained identical. Yet Eleanor herself had changed. Her eyes dulled, her lips parted slightly, as if exhaling after years of silence. The Society contacted Dr. Harriet Vale, a 29-year-old conservator newly graduated from Cambridge. Brilliant, skeptical, and fiercely curious, Vale specialized in chemical degradation of early photographic materials. She approached the portrait with the cool detachment of science and left shaken by what she saw. Over the next several months, Vale began tracing the portrait's lineage. She scoured auction records, private estate archives, and museum inventories in search of every surviving print. One by one, she assembled them chronologically, from Selwyn's original 1889 issue to the most recent 1927 copy. What emerged was not decay, it was progression. Each successive reproduction revealed a woman growing older. By the 1915 print, Eleanor's posture had shifted ever so slightly, a subtle lean forward, as if gravity itself had taken hold. By 1920, faint streaks of grey appeared near her temples. The glass plate, however, the true original, remained unchanged. Vale conducted microscopic analysis, studying the silver nitrate, collodion layers, and exposure residue. There were no signs of emulsion distortion, no heat damage, no fungal bloom, none of the common culprits. The surrounding objects, from the faint curtain folds to the ornate chairback, were identical down to the grain. Only Eleanor Winslow's figure evolved. When Vale presented her findings to the Historical Society's board, the response was polite disbelief. The chairman suggested it was a trick of perception, a case of gradual exposure fatigue or differential fading. Others blamed contamination, misaligned reproduction methods, or over-restoration. But Vale persisted. She took one of the prints home, comparing it nightly under lamplight, convinced the changes weren't random chemical shifts. They followed a rhythm. Her final note in the Society's record book captured her unease. The chemicals aged the same, but the woman inside seemed to live and, with time, grow old. It was the first time anyone had documented a photograph that changed without interference, and it would not be the last. To understand the enigma of Eleanor Winslow's portrait, one must first understand the man behind the camera, Arthur Selwyn, a photographer whose quiet obsession with realism blurred the line between art and the unknown. In the late 1800s, Fleet Street was alive with invention, printing presses, chemical trades, and the constant hum of curiosity that came with the Victorian thirst for discovery. Among the narrow shop fronts and gaslit corridors stood Selwyn & Co.'s Portraiture, a modest studio known for producing images that were, in the words of one journalist, so lifelike they bordered on breathing. Selwyn's technique was unorthodox. He preferred working by candlelight, keeping his subjects motionless for long, exhausting sessions that could stretch over hours. Unlike most photographers of his time, who sought sharpness and speed, Selwyn believed that true likeness required endurance, but that a person's essence revealed itself only after stillness broke the body's facade. He called his process long capture exposure. The technique was dismissed by peers as impractical, even dangerous. Yet Selwyn's portraits had a strange magnetism, eyes that seemed to glisten faintly even when viewed decades later, flesh that appeared to hold warmth within the silver nitrate. In 1954, nearly 70 years after Eleanor's portrait was taken, Selwyn's personal diary surfaced from his grandson's estate during a routine property auction in Surrey. It was a small leather-bound book filled with cramped handwriting, chemical formulas, and sketches of lenses and lighting rigs. But within its yellowed pages, historians found a chilling entry dated November 17, 1889, the day of Eleanor Winslow's sitting. Miss Winslow arrived precisely at 6 in the evening. Selwyn wrote, she did not remove her gloves. She declined refreshment. Her stillness was unnatural, not forced but chosen. She did not move once. Her eyes never blinked. It felt as though she was studying me through the lens. The entry continued with technical notes, details about the camera aperture, candle positioning, and the chemical ratio of silver bromide to ether. But beneath the precision there was a trembling unease. There was a quietness in her that unsettled me, Selwyn noted, as if she had already been here once before. Then came the passage that confounded historians for decades. She requested to see the plate before it was developed. I told her it was impossible, the emulsion too fragile. Still, she insisted. She leaned over the unprocessed glass and whispered, "If I don't return, this will." I thought her words were poetic, the sort that lonely people speak into rooms that will never answer. Selwyn's next entries drifted into practical matters, payments, client bookings, lens adjustments, until his handwriting grew increasingly erratic in early December of that year. The final note concerning Eleanor was written on December 4, 1889. Miss Winslow has not returned for her proofs. Her address on Park Crescent is empty. Servants dismissed, house shuttered. I fear she is unwell, though no obituary has appeared. I thought the camera captured her likeness, but perhaps it captured her waiting. After that, her name never appeared in his writings again. Public records confirmed the details. Eleanor Winslow's estate was transferred to distant relatives in 1891. There was no death certificate, no funeral notice, and no burial record anywhere in London's registries. It was as though she had simply been erased. When Dr. Harriet Vale obtained copies of the diary decades later, she noted something peculiar. Selwyn's technical notes around the time of Eleanor's portrait included a brief mention of extended temporal layering, a phrase unknown in photographic terminology. He described experimenting with exposures so prolonged that they allowed the subject to linger in the plate beyond the present moment. Historians have debated its meaning for years. Some suggest Selwyn had stumbled into an early, flawed form of spirit photography, the controversial 19th century practice of attempting to capture the souls of the dead on film. Others believe he was experimenting with the new collodion dry plate process, and that Eleanor's stillness during those long exposures imprinted something beyond the physical, perhaps even the illusion of time itself. Yet one line in his diary unsettled even the skeptics. It appeared near the back of the book, unconnected to any date, scrawled in faint graphite as if written long after the rest. The eyes in the portrait no longer match the eyes I remember. I am certain they watch me when I sleep. By the time of Selwyn's death in 1901, his studio had closed, his experiments dismissed as eccentricities of a forgotten craftsman. But the rediscovery of his diary reframed everything. It transformed the tale of one photograph into something larger, a question of whether early photography had accidentally opened a doorway between moments, between memory and life itself. Some said Selwyn was merely a man of science driven to obsession. Others whispered that he had captured not Eleanor's likeness, but her endurance, a fragment of consciousness sealed within silver and glass. Whatever the truth, his words endure as both confession and curse. I thought the camera captured her likeness, but perhaps it captured her waiting, and with that, the mystery deepened, not just of the portrait that aged, but of the woman who never did. By the 1960s, the legend of Eleanor Winslow's portrait had drifted from dusty archives into whispered folklore. Yet, in an era defined by progress and reason, the scientific community was determined to settle the matter once and for all. What had once been dismissed as superstition would now be subjected to the scrutiny of microscopes and molecular analysis. In 1962, the British Photographic Research Council initiated a detailed investigation into the Selwyn glass negatives. The team, led by Dr. Alan Mercer, a pioneer in photochemical restoration, approached the case with cautious skepticism. Mercer's team catalogued over 30 surviving reproductions of the portrait, ranging from 1890 to 1959. They expected to find evidence of re-etching, contamination, or even forgery. What they found instead unsettled them deeply. Each successive reproduction of Eleanor's face appeared older. Fine lines emerged where none had existed. The soft glow around her eyes dimmed, replaced by faint shadows beneath the lids. Yet the surrounding environment, the chair's carvings, the texture of her lace collar, the background's soft blur, remained unchanged across all samples. Under high magnification, the molecular composition of the silver nitrate used in Selwyn's prints showed something extraordinary. Localized decay isolated to the area corresponding to Eleanor's skin. It was as if the chemical emulsion had responded to something living, Mercer remarked in his 1964 journal entry. A biological presence that lingered long after exposure. The team conducted exposure mapping under infrared and ultraviolet light. No traces of tampering appeared. No brushstrokes, no overlays, no evidence of double exposure. Instead, spectral imaging revealed minute variations in the silver halide crystals, patterns typically associated with chemical reaction to organic matter. But there was none to be found on the glass surface. It was as though the reaction had occurred from within the image itself. Dr. Mercer's assistant, Dr. Vivienne Crane, proposed an unsettling theory. What if we're not observing decay, she posited, but adaptation? The photograph may not be deteriorating. It may be changing in response to observation. Her suggestion was ridiculed publicly, but privately, several members of the team admitted they could not dismiss the idea. By 1965, the portrait had gained national attention. It was exhibited at the London Historical Museum under the title Eleanor the Image That Grew Old. Lines of visitors stretched around the block. Some swore the woman's expression shifted before their eyes, subtle, almost imperceptible changes in the curve of her lips, the tilt of her gaze. Others claimed to feel a strange heaviness in the room, as though the air itself thickened around the glass. BBC Radio aired a special program in late 1966 called The Image That Grew Old, interviewing scientists, skeptics, and believers alike. One memorable segment featured Dr. Crane, her voice quiet and unsteady. You can destroy a negative, but not what it remembers. Perhaps the image isn't just pigment and salt. It's memory suspended in time. And memories, as we know, do not stay still. Newspapers dubbed the phenomenon the chemical haunting. Laboratories across Europe began replicating Selwyn's techniques in controlled environments, long-exposure photography under candlelight, using vintage emulsions and natural silver nitrate. None succeeded in recreating the same anomalies. By the late 1960s, the portrait had transcended science and entered cultural mythology. Scholars debated its meaning in journals, priests referenced it in sermons, and conspiracy theorists claimed it was evidence of the soul's photographic imprint. Still, the core question persisted, haunting every attempt at explanation. If the image was merely chemistry, why did only the woman change? Dr. Mercer's final report, published in 1969, ended not with a conclusion but a confession. We can chart the decay, we can map the molecular shifts, we can prove what changed, but not why. Something unseen once stood before Arthur Selwyn's lens, and whatever it was, it seems unwilling to let go. That line would cement the portrait's place in modern legend, a relic that defied time, science, and death itself. By the late 1990s, the mystery of Eleanor Winslow's portrait had settled into quiet obscurity. The Selwyn archives, once debated in university halls and late-night radio broadcasts, now gathered dust in the lower vaults of the London Historical Society. Most historians dismissed the aging portrait theory as myth born of misremembered prints. But in 1998, a digitization initiative would resurrect what many believed buried for good. That year, the Society began scanning fragile Victorian glass plates to preserve them before their emulsions crumbled to dust. Among hundreds of forgotten negatives, one small case bore a faint label written in fading ink, E. Winslow. Not in 1889. Inside lay the original portrait of the woman whose image had puzzled scholars for decades, The digitization team treated it with ritual precision. Each glass plate was gently cleaned, cooled, and placed under a high-resolution digital scanner capable of capturing microscopic imperfections invisible to the eye. When Eleanor's image appeared on the monitor, the room fell silent. Unlike the other portraits, hers seemed alive, the contrast unusually deep, her skin tone luminous against the dull grayscale of the Victorian backdrop. Yet the technicians noticed something off. Faint distortions in the data feed, a subtle flicker localized around her face. Assuming static interference, they rescanned it. The result was the same, except this time within the infrared layer of the scan, faint markings began to appear. Beneath the chemical surface, embedded in the plate's emulsion, were three unmistakable words. Faint yet deliberate. Still here. The restoration team froze. The inscription was located beneath the protective coating, meaning it had been sealed inside the plate during its creation, not etched later. Chemical testing confirmed it. The lettering existed between the collodion and silver nitrate layers, an impossibility under 19th-century photographic processes. Dr. Colin Marwick, the project's senior analyst, published his preliminary notes that same week. "This is not surface damage," he wrote. "The script curves with intentionality. It's handwriting, not pattern. The plate has recorded something that should not exist." What startled him even more was the evolving gaze. Comparing earlier analog prints from 1903, 1927, and 1961 to the digital render, he noticed a minute but measurable shift in the subject's eyes. In earlier versions, Eleanor's gaze drifted left, distant and serene. In the latest scan, her pupils aligned forward, meeting the viewer's stare with unsettling directness. Multiple labs confirmed it. No glass warping, no exposure difference. The movement was internal. Microscopic alignment tests showed molecular rearrangement in the silver nitrate particles, specifically around the iris area. As if, one researcher noted, the image had subtly repositioned itself to acknowledge observation. Weeks later, archivists cross-referenced new findings with an unrelated collection discovered in 1999, a box of handwritten letters from St. Mary's Convent in Surrey. The notes, dated 1892, were written by a nun named Sister Agatha. One passage described a young woman who had visited the convent frequently that winter. Miss Winslow came often to pray. She feared to vanish, she said, feared to be forgotten by God and man alike. She spoke of a likeness, her second life, she called it, through which she might remain. Her eyes were so calm, so determined, that I believed she already lived within it. After that year, Eleanor Winslow vanished entirely from records. No death certificate, no obituary, no estate claims. It was as if she dissolved into her portrait, leaving only her captured form to age and shift through time. When the Times of London published a short piece in late 1999 titled "The Woman Who Refused to Leave Her Portrait Public," fascination reignited overnight. Visitors demanded to see the image. Conspiracy theories flooded early internet forums. Paranormal investigators claimed it was evidence of spiritual retention, a Victorian soul captured in silver. Scientists, meanwhile, fought to explain what they couldn't replicate. By 2001, the Selwyn plate had been removed from public access and stored under climate-controlled isolation. The final report from the Historical Imaging Project recorded one final anomaly. Microfractures forming across the emulsion layer resembled faint outlines of new facial creases, like age lines appearing on the digital render, though the plate itself remained chemically unchanged. The document's closing words were clinical, but chilling. Infrared spectrometry reveals molecular realignment consistent with gradual organic evolution within the emulsion structure. Observed facial variations between 1998 and 2001 measure at 0.17 millimeters. Subject's gaze orientation continues to centralize. In non-technical terms, the portrait is still changing. No further tests were conducted after 2002. The project's files were sealed, its images encrypted under archival lock. A century after her sitting in Arthur Selwyn's studio, Eleanor Winslow's face still lingers, older, wiser, more human. What the camera captured in 1889 was not merely a reflection, but a residue, and the portrait, even now, has not decayed, it has evolved. Today, the portrait of Eleanor Winslow rests behind tempered glass in a dimly lit wing of the National Gallery of Historical Photography in London. It occupies a single wall, separated from the others by a velvet cord, the kind usually reserved for relics or dangerous things. The room remains cold, its temperature regulated to the precise decimal. Every hour, a monitor records changes in humidity, light, and radiation exposure. None of it, curators insist, should affect the plate. And yet, visitors claim the image never looks quite the same twice. In person, the portrait is breathtaking. Eleanor's face, once the picture of Victorian serenity, now carries faint traces of time, a tired grace that shouldn't exist on a photograph. The delicate texture of her hair appears softer than in previous scans, her jawline subtly thinner. It's as though the woman inside continues to age, while the glass itself stands untouched. The gallery's experts remain deeply divided. To some, it is a photochemical masterpiece, a glitch of chemistry and chance. They argue that unseen residues, humidity cycles, or microscopic fungal growth could explain the shifting features. It's a miracle of preservation, says Professor Alton Reeves, a materials chemist at King's College. A visual illusion born of entropy and human imagination. But to others, the explanation reaches beyond science. Parapsychologists and consciousness researchers argue the image is proof of something far stranger, that emotion, intention, perhaps even the essence of being, confuse into the physical world. They call it the Selwyn effect. One theory suggests that prolonged observation, the collective focus of millions over time, may be feeding the change. If consciousness observes reality into existence, they ask, what happens when the same gaze lingers for over a century? This has fueled a growing ethical debate. Should the portrait remain on public display, or be hidden again to halt its evolution? Each exhibition seems to mark a new alteration, subtle but measurable. Some curators fear that human fascination itself sustains the transformation, that every glance invites another molecular shift, like the subject responding to the living world watching her, and yet hiding her seems equally cruel. To cover the portrait would deny its existence, and perhaps the woman's final wish to be remembered forever. Last year, the gallery hosted a limited viewing, only 12 attendees per session, no photography allowed. Among them was Dr. Harriet Vale's great-granddaughter, now an art historian herself. In a quiet interview afterward, she spoke softly, almost apologetically. "It isn't about whether she's alive," she said. "It's about whether she ever left. The woman in that portrait doesn't just look older now. She looks like she's watching us." The portrait remains on display, but the gallery has stopped producing prints, and late at night, the security footage, though reviewed countless times, continues to show a flicker, brief but certain from within the frame, as if Eleanor Winslow still shifts slightly, waiting for the next gaze to find her. Photography was never meant to deceive time, only to pause it. A frame of light, a frozen instant, proof that something once was. Yet in the hands of the Victorians, that invention became something else entirely, an act of preservation. A way to bind not just the face but the feeling, the ache of wanting someone to remain. The portrait of Eleanor Winslow stands as both marvel and warning. It reminds us that every photograph is more than silver and glass. It is a trace of presence, a quiet echo of the person who once stood before the lens. Perhaps that is why the image continues to shift, because remembrance itself is never still. Memory evolves, reshapes, survives the living. Some call it chemistry, others call it haunting. But maybe it is simply persistence, the refusal of a moment to end. For every photograph is a mirror of time looking back at us, reflecting not just what was captured, but what refused to fade. And so the question lingers. Soft as breath against glass, if an image can outlive its subject and change with time, then who's really watching whom?